Well, hi everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Godcast. My name is Father Alex. I am the host. I'm also the vicar of St Matthew's Church in Burnley, and I am the author of Our Daily Bread from Argos to the Altar, a Priest Story, which is available on Amazon and Waterstones and all good bookshops. So do check that out. The guest today on the Godcast is Nick Tall. Nick is a lay member of General Synod. He is a real advocate for inclusion. He's involved with the campaign for the blessing of same-sex relationships and equal marriage. He's involved with Inclusive Church. He's involved with Open Table, and he is a real advocate and supporter. So do enjoy this interview now with Nick Tall. If you do enjoy it, then do check out my other interviews on the Godcast. There's lots of people from a religious background. There's lots of celebrities, musicians, authors, something for everybody. So do go check that out. But for now, enjoy this interview with Nick Tall. I'm delighted to say that joining me on the Godcast this week is Nick Tall. And Nick is a member of General Synod in the Church of England. He's an advocate for Inclusive Church, and he sits on numerous groups and panels. Nick, it's fabulous to get you on the Godcast. How are you?
I'm fine, thanks, Alex. Really good to be on the Godcast. Great to be joining you.
Yeah, it's great to get you on, Nick. So let's get down to business. Well, maybe a little bit of context, Nick. Tell us why you as an individual are so keen to be an advocate for a more inclusive church.
Yeah, well, I've been involved, particularly I was drawn in through campaigning on the LGBT plus side of things and been involved in that for about 10 years. And it's because I don't have skin in the game. I'm not gay. I'm not trans. I have, by complete chance, life has given me a lot of privilege in life in the sense that I'm white, I'm straight, I'm married, I'm mostly able-bodied, I'm financially secure, all of those sorts of things, which means I can confidently go into any church and I know I'll be welcomed with open arms and people will be very happy to have me there. And if I ask to be involved in part of the life of the church, or if I thought I wanted to apply for ordination, because of who I am, there wouldn't be any barriers whatsoever. And it just really galls me when other people, just because they happen to be gay or they happen to be a woman or they happen to be global majority heritage, do hit barriers that someone like me doesn't have. So as a Christian, I see the gospel very much being about reaching out to draw in those who are marginalized. Jesus is forever doing that within scripture. And so I just feel compelled out of my Christian faith that everyone should have the chance to have the sort of privilege I've had, which leads a very full life.
Yeah, and this led you to be a member of the Church of England General Synod, Nick. Is that was that a difficult decision? Did you always wanted to get engaged in that form of ministry and discipleship?
Well, it was I can remember quite clearly. I used to meet up with some friends locally in Somerset on a regular basis to talk about how we could just help the church, whether locally or nationally, be a bit better in terms of being more inclusive. And I remember very strongly saying, I'm not going to stand for General Synod. But as a bit of background for me, many years ago, I worked for a diocese. I ran the Synod office for that particular diocese. So I was very involved with the governance and the workings of the Church of England. And so I understood how it worked. And it just made me realize, actually, if you're going to help make changes, it's probably best to be inside the room when the decisions are taking place, to be able to make the case and to vote. And so in the end, I accepted that actually I was probably a synod-shaped person and needed to put myself forward.
And the process of if we look at living in love and faith, Nick, give our listeners and viewers some context to how this process began and how it evolved. It happened before I was a member of Synod. Just tell us a bit about that, if you would.
Yeah, just a little bit of history. Well, I mean, if you look, I mean, the Church of England exists within a wider society, and as questions arise and things change within wider society, they also bear upon the church. So one thing that really struck me is living in love and faith is probably the seventh such report or initiative the Church of England has had about LGBTQIA plus people and how their lives fit in with the church. About the seventh such report over about 50 years. So there's a long history of this, as long as, you know, sort of society has been waking up to and making more space for LGBT plus people. In 2017, the iteration at the time of the Church of England in its ongoing trying to figure out this, a report was brought to General Synod by the House of Bishops, and the General Synod was asked just to take note of the report, not to approve it, but just to take note of it. And General Synod voted not to take note, which was very much a surprise at the time. A lot of people weren't expecting that. It's not something that normally happens. And that really prompted the House of Bishops to think, okay, we need to get quite serious and think how we can really make a step change in this debate, which has just dragged on for so long. And so the usual things sort of happened that, you know, framework was set up, people were charged with going away and gathering evidence and writing a report, and a report came back and was published. I think it was late in 2020 with lots of resources. And the particular approach LLF was taking, which was a bit different, was it was wanting to be much bigger in involving the whole church, or giving the whole church the opportunity to be involved. So a lot of teaching resources were created. An LLF course was created. There were videos and podcasts, so that it wasn't just a small closed group doing the politics of the church nationally that were involved with the debate, but to try and move the church as a whole to a more sort of engaged and informed position. Off the back of all of that engagement, in late 2022, a report came through from people who'd been involved with that. Over around, I think, 6,000 people had written in with their views as to what they think should happen next. And of course, we know there are people with lots of different views within the church. If there weren't, we wouldn't be having this debate forever. But generally, people were saying, can we have some sort of liturgical affirmation of same-sex relationships, whether that's equal marriage or blessings of same-sex relationships? And can we also keep the church together? And can we also have some decisions made so that we know where we stand and we can actually move on, because the church has other things to think about other than just same-sex relationships. In response to that, the House of Bishops then brought a set of proposals to General Synod in February 2023, which were actually things that the House of Bishops could do under their own steam. So they were fairly modest. If we were wanting much more radical things like approving equal marriage, that would require quite a heavy and high level of agreement within General Synod, which it was felt we probably wouldn't achieve. So there are some very achievable things brought. They were approved in February 2023 by the General Synod. And really, since then, we've had over a year of arguing more and more about how we actually do those things. And there's been quite a backlash from those who feel opposed to any change whatsoever, to try and oppose that and to get that bogged down, and for their position to be heard, if you know, to be fair. But you know, we've had that. There have been further debates at Synod. More work is ongoing, but that's a bit of background.
And when LLF was launched, Nick, were you an optimist? Were you hopeful, or were you kind of a little bit cynical at this point?
Well, I would say I've never been cynical. I'm usually on the optimistic side. That's partly as a person of faith. I always am optimistic. You know, I believe in God. I walk with hope always. I'm also a straight person and relatively new to all of this, having only been involved about 5 years when LLF came out. I have known some absolutely wonderful gay Christians who have been decades walking this path and have been let down time and again. So I would say that I was open for there being change, certainly willing to be engaged with the process. I do recognize it's something that LLF isn't something that one part of the church should do to another, but actually a process whereby we gain greater understanding of each other and figure out a way how we can most authentically be the sort of Christian that God calls us to be. So I would say I started out with, some hope, but not sure what to see. And I would say I still have, optimism, even though a lot of people are feeling the process has dragged on a bit so far.
Yeah, and let's just go to that synod in February 23, Nick. I mean, I've worked in management most of my life, and middle management roles, of course, never a senior role. But that was one of the most grueling, challenging, upsetting 28, 40, 24, 48 hours of my working life to listen to people on both sides of the argument, people who, as you said just a few moments ago, have been walking this struggle for decades against people who, in good conscience, absolutely oppose any suggestion that a blessing of a same-sex relationship should be legitimized. What were your feelings as all that was going on in those debates, Nick? Where was your head going?
Okay, I mean, so first of all, my own church experience is I worship in a provincial evangelical church in a county downtown down in the southwest, and a lot of the things which people say around same-sex relationships and about LGBTQIA plus people, I have heard before, and so I've got a relatively sort of habituated to some of the comments which some people might not come across in other areas of life. I also recognize that people who come from a more conservative perspective, actually, these are people who are friends of mine. I worship with people who hold some of the views that you and I would disagree with. And so I cannot other the people I hear in General Synod who say things that I disagree with on this matter. They are still my sisters and brothers in Christ. I will still do all I can to love them and to support them. I had a slightly different experience, I expect, from most within the debate, because I helped to organize the inclusive constituency within General Synod. So I'm known as a bit of a stats geek. I understand the sort of numbers within General Synod. So I was really kind of doing the sort of the technical analysis of what was going on vote by vote and trying to figure that out. So it was huge concentration throughout. And, I wasn't getting too emotionally pushed either way in some ways. The minute the vote came through, I went jelly. I just felt I'd been concentrating on it so hard. The vote came through. We'd achieved what we'd hoped we'd want to achieve. And yes, I suddenly found I didn't know what to do with myself. But I suppose it's, you and I both enjoy our sport. It's the sort of sporting analogy of while it's actually happening, you're just focused on what needs to be done. And at the end, when it finishes, suddenly all those months, those years of preparation for that moment, it's all gone, and you don't know what happens after that.
Yeah, but just staying on that theme of a sporting analogy, it wasn't so much as winning the FA Cup, it was more winning the Sherpa Van Trophy final, wasn't it? Because people like myself and others just think, well, this is not huge. In the context, it's huge, but in many ways, it's minuscule. It was described by some as crumbs under. We're not even being offered crumbs under the table.
Sure.
So and you being the eternal optimist, and me maybe being a glass half empty kind of person. Where do you see the future of this? I mean, it is 18 months, and we're still many ways not that much further forward. What's your kind of analysis as we look to the future?
Okay, well, I mean, first of all, addressing the sort of the crumbs under the table thing, absolutely agree there. I mean, what I want is equal marriage within the Church of England, in that for my, if my daughter decides she wants to meet someone and wants to marry them, that, if she just happens to meet a nice young guy, she'll be able to go to, the church where she grew up and get married there. I want, if she happens to meet, some nice young woman and wants to marry her, the same thing can happen. I want that complete equality there. What's on the table is not that. It's a step in that direction. And I think once things are implemented, it will help to change the culture of the church, help change a lot of attitudes. A lot of the resistance that was there with women priests in the 1980s, early 1990s, a certain amount of that just went away when people finally saw women being ordained and realized that actually there was nothing to be afraid of. What I think is going to happen next, well, there have been working groups that have been meeting. There have been meetings of the House of Bishops looking at implementation. I've not been a part of any of those meetings, so anything I say now is not a secret scoop. It's speculation from the outside. But I'm kind of picking up a sense that there is an acceptance that a couple of things are going to happen. How they're going to happen and what comes alongside them, I'll come on to. But the two things that are going to happen, the first is that standalone services of blessing are going to happen. So you probably remember, Alex, before Christmas, the House of Bishops said, here's some liturgical resources you can use in an existing service, like your Sunday morning service for the blessings, you know, with a gay couple. But at the moment, we're not wanting you to do something on a on a Saturday morning that people might think looks like a wedding. It looks like actually those standalone services where people will be able to invite along friends and family and church community and all the rest and bring their relationship and you know, have prayers said and be together before God. It looks like that is at some point going to happen. The other thing that we think is going to happen is that clergy who want to be in a same-sex marriage will be able to. Many of your listeners will be surprised to hear that clergy at the moment can't be in a same-sex marriage and be given a license by a bishop. And there have been some high-profile cases of people clergy who have got married, who've ended up not being able to move jobs because no other bishop can give them a job. It looks like that might come to an end, at least in some parts of the church. This is a slightly complex area because we're trying to be very careful as the church to make sure that everyone's conscience is observed. So we've already said any priest who doesn't want to use the prayers of blessing with a same-sex couple, they don't have to. It just doesn't have to do that, and they'll be supported in that decision. Bishops have consciences as well. And there are some bishops who say in full conscience, if they were asked to ordain or license a person in a same-sex marriage, they would have difficulties with that. So there's still work to be done figuring out how that can be done. There is a third part of the discussion which goes around all sorts of vague euphemistic language, such as pastoral support or you know, pastoral reassurance. But it's basically saying, okay, we're moving forward to allow prayers of love and faith to happen. We're moving forward for the guidance we have for clergy and how they order their lives so that it's going to be much easier for LGBTQIA plus clergy to be married to someone of the same sex and still continue ministry. What changes do we need to make? What provisions do we need to put in place so that everyone within the church can live within that new context within full conscience, regardless of their particular theological position within these issues? And there's still vague work that's needed to be sorted out around that. And there are lots of different models that have been talked about, some quite outlandish, some very minimal. And that's where I see there's still more work to be done.
That all sounds very positive to maybe progressives out there, but you and I know, Nick, that there are people within more conservative wings of the church that are, for want of a word, wanting to kind of move properties, such as you are. You know, they want this term settlement is being used, hasn't it? And there's the thing called the Ephesians Fund, and so this kind of looks like some maneuvering from conservative aspects of the church to you know, almost walk away in disgust. What's your take on that?
I would start from the position of taking very seriously and recognizing that there are people for whom the suggestion of the changes that have come off the back of LLF have been a real shock. We know that some parts of the church didn't fully engage with LLF, and to be honest, COVID was happening, so I can't blame everyone for not doing that. But it is one of those things that a bit like, you remember after the sort of 2016 referendum vote, a lot of people suddenly saw how voting went and were suddenly shocked to think, oh goodness, I didn't realize, because we only really relate to people with similar views to ourselves. So I knew a lot of people who voted Remain who were suddenly really surprised that so many people didn't see the world the way they did. And I think that there are probably quite a lot of people in the church of different views who are waking up to the fact that the Church of England is actually quite diverse. And it's a real shock if you worship, say, within a fairly traditional conservative church week by week, and you have a certain set of assumptions of how the church is, to suddenly find the set of proposals around gay clergy and blessings of relationships, to suddenly realize that will be happening maybe in a church next door to you. I can see how that would be a real surprise. So, I do have some sympathy of needing to find ways to reassure people that actually there is still going to be a space for them within the life of the church when we move to extend the opportunities that are available. It always saddens me when money gets involved, because I think that can sometimes be seen as a bit coercive. It's almost a bit like a controlling relationship. Well, you want to do that, well, I'll withdraw the funds so that you're going to really struggle if you don't. And I think there's a lot of sort of anxiety in parts of the church as to what shape the church might come into if too much ground is given there. I certainly hope we don't end up in a position where the church is effectively internally partitioned, where effectively we have two different varieties of the Church of England under one roof, not talking to each other, just sharing buildings and a few other things, but otherwise operating separately. That really, I want a Church of England that holds together and actually, we can value each other because of what we've got in common, not because of what we have that's different. But I am aware there are churches that are feeling very unsettled. I hope that they don't use that sense of being unsettled and weaponize it to try and divide the church. I hope they will respond by seeing that Christians like myself and yourself are brothers and sisters in Christ, and that actually, our mission together, our ministry together is much stronger if we have a high acceptance of each other and can work together, rather than trying to find arcane structural ways to rearrange the church.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what you've said, Nick. But a struggle for me and maybe for some others is how far is enough? How much can I give you without actually saying enough is enough? So I absolutely support the idea if that somebody doesn't want to bless a gay couple, then don't. I can't. If I was a gay person, it's the last thing I would want you to do anyway. I'd be offended. And I do consider these people my brothers and sisters in Christ. And I'm saying, if you don't want to do it, then don't. But what they're saying is, yeah, I don't want to do it, but I want to do everything I possibly can to make sure you don't do it either. And the crux probably becomes because of the theology, doesn't it? Of the literal interpretation of the scripture. And the moment you move a piece away, then the puzzle or the circle has now become a square. And within that, maybe, I don't know, maybe there's questions, well, you did it for divorced couples, you did it for the ordination of women. What's different about this? Just your reflections, Nick, on what I've said.
I agree with you completely that we're at a point where it's about a sizable minority, but a minority nonetheless, wanting to try and control what a significant majority, only just a majority, but over half are wanting to do. So it's not saying this is everything that everyone in the church has to do. It's about that minority wanting to say to the majority, we may be protected from having to do these things, but we don't want you to do them either. And I think that needs to be acknowledged. And yeah, it's quite clear. I wouldn't want any priest to have to carry out a service that they wouldn't in full conscience want to do. Around clergy marriage, it's very simple. If you're, a priest and you're opposed to clergy marrying someone of the same sex, don't marry someone of the same sex. It's as simple as that. And if people are wanting to strongly be able to differentiate themselves, if they're concerned that people in the local community might look at them and say, well, you're part of the Church of England, and you now believe this, there is nothing stopping a parish church putting up a sign on their notice board or putting something on the front of their website, declaring their position that they don't use the prayers of love and faith. This is our theology. If people want to do that, they can. In fact, we would probably welcome that as a sign of openness and transparency. But I think it's also fair to say that we've often found it hard to step into each other's shoes and look through each other's eyes theologically at how we tick. So for those of us on the progressive and inclusive side, the changes that are being proposed, as you say, are really small. They're just crumbs. It's not equality. It's not where we want to end up. We accept that it's better than where we are, but it's not where we're at now. But I also do accept that for some people within the church, this is seen as a major shift in theology, of the theology of marriage. It relates to the nature of salvation. There are all sorts of other complex issues involved, and that actually it is a big deal. And that's part of the reason we're sort of stuck trying to figure out what will be an appropriate way forward. Because for some of us, look, this is pretty small, just let us get on with it and we'll leave you in peace. For others, no, this is actually changing the rules of the game of how we operate as Christians. And there needs to be some sort of greater understanding of each other. But it also needs, at the end of the day, to recognize a majority in the church, in bishops, amongst clergy, amongst laity, as far as we know, with any evidence there is that's out there, whether that's Times Church surveys or votes in the College of Bishops or YouGov surveys or whatever, a majority are saying we need to be more affirming and more inclusive. And that kind of puts the ball in the court of those who say there can be no change, of saying, well, how do you respond when the majority of the church at all levels are saying we do need to change? Because actually staying where we are at that point isn't an option. So you do need to come up with something a bit more than just we're staying where we are.
Do you think we are putting too much expectation and pressure on our bishops, Nick? There is a clear difference of opinion in the House of Bishops, as there is in the House of Clergy, as in the House of Laity, as there is in the wider church. Are we asking them to solve the unsolvable?
I don't think we're expecting enough of our bishops, actually. I think that the House of Bishops made a deliberate political choice in the lead up to February 2023 in General Synod of bringing decisions of things the House of Bishops could do under powers that they already have. So it wasn't General Synod, gives powers to the bishops to do X. The motion you and I voted for was this synod welcomes the House of Bishops' decisions to introduce liturgy, to replace pastoral guidance. So the House of Bishops have come out and said, our powers are such, we can do these things. And do you welcome us? And we gave the political authority by welcoming that in the February 23 vote, which we reiterated again in November 23 at Synod. The House of Bishops is charged with leadership. And we do need leadership in this area. And I recognize they are in a very difficult position. It's a knife edge that they're walking on, because on the one side, they don't want to be seen to be imposing a final deal on everyone. But on the other hand, they're wanting to consult so much. It's almost as if they're saying, well, we can't figure it out amongst ourselves. So let's just get more and more working groups together. Let's have more and more debates at Synod. And hopefully at some point, everyone will agree or something will emerge. I'm not sure if that's the sort of leadership we're at. We've had enough consultation. LLF's been taking place for 7 years now. We've had thousands of people in the parishes involved in debating with it. We know what they think. We've had General Synod debating it. I think Synod's had over 40 hours of time in it so far. We know broadly where, the proportions of different people think within General Synod. We know the big picture, that the majority want to move forward to be more inclusive. There is a sizable and valued minority who are unsure or opposed to that. So we need to make sure that we don't move so fast that it causes fallout there. The bishops know that's the situation. I think we need them to basically have some leadership now. And the problem, if they don't, is that it just prolongs it. And we know that there's a lot of hurt caused, hurt to LGBT plus people who feel insecure in the church until this is settled, hurt amongst clergy who don't know what position they're in, hurt amongst people thinking about ordination, not knowing what sort of church they're going for, hurt amongst churches with different points of view who just need a settled position. I think we've had enough debate. Yeah, there are still some details to sort out, but ultimately we've kind of agreed where we're heading. We need a bit of leadership and a bit of clarity.
Do you think there's an issue about trust and integrity, Nick? I mean, the Bishop of Newcastle was the Bishop of London stepped down as lead for LLF, and the Bishop of Newcastle was in post shorter than Liz Truss was Prime Minister. What do you think these kind of things say to everybody who's involved in the debate? I mean, it seems like a poison chalice. Whoever becomes lead of living in love and faith and discussions around same-sex relationship is going to have their supporters, but is also going to have pelters from the side throwing stones.
Sure, anyone leading on this, I have a huge amount of respect for. I've got a lot of respect for Bishop Martin and the way he's trying to lead it at the moment, as I did for Bishop Sarah previously, and how she managed that. I think part of it, I think we need to actually examine ourselves when we say there's a lack of trust here. And do we, when we say there is a lack of trust, actually mean I'm not getting what I want, and therefore I'm going to say the process isn't working or the process is being hijacked or sabotaged? I can see how, for example, from a progressive perspective, I could lose trust in the process, and I could be saying, look, decisions have been taken, votes have been cast, why isn't it happening? But I also recognize, because I worship in a church alongside, a conservative vicar and other conservative people within my own church, I do recognize the genuine faith that's there, and I can recognize why there can be concerns and sticking points. I think perhaps there needs to be more communication. That's very difficult to manage because in general Synod, we're not like MPs where it's our full-time job. I mean, you've got a full-time job, you're a parish priest, I've got busy work and all the rest. We do Synod in the margins of our lives, and that doesn't necessarily give us the time to build up the relationships so we can build up trust. Ultimately, I think we just need to get on with it. We've had a lot of debate, and I think if people say, oh, we haven't had this information or we haven't debated about that or whatever, I think what I usually hear is we're needing to delay on this because I'm feeling unhappy. And I think to delay when we've had 7 reports over 50 years, I mean, how long does it take?
Yeah, I think it raises issues for me about credibility and standing in the wider in the fabric of society in the country. Around us we've got the Church of Wales that are fully inclusive and have recently installed a bishop that's in a gay relationship. I recently had a friend on from the Methodist Church where it seemed as acceptable and supporting of same-sex relationships. The national state, the government of England embraces and speaks of a society of inclusion, and some people call for the disestablishment of the church. And in many ways, I have every sympathy with them because, we have to have credibility. One thing that struck me, Nick, was how little press has been on in recent months. Yes, back in February it was quite high, but it's like, well, they're just going to get on and they're going to keep going, and eventually somebody will tell us when it's all resolved. What's your thoughts about the impact of what's happening in the church? I think sometimes we think we're more important than we are.
Yeah, I mean, certainly I completely agree that when you look at this from the perspective of people outside the church looking in, it looks just bizarre that in 2024 in the UK, people's experience and expectations in working life, within their communities, amidst their family relationships and so forth, has just moved on so far ahead of where the church is at to become so much more loving, welcoming and accepting place. The sort of debate that's happening within the church For some people confirms the cynicism they have about it already, and for others just makes us a toxic brand almost. We do have to manage our debate conscious of the fact that we are a national church and we do have responsibilities for the whole of England. That's partly why I'm involved with the new organisation setting up together in the Church of England, because I passionately believe as a Christian that the Church of England is there for everyone in England. You know, whether, you know, whatever your gender, whatever your ethnic background, what, you know, whether you're disabled or not, and whether you're LGBTQIA plus or not, whatever it is, the church needs to be there for you. We do have to be slightly conscious of the sort of very real concerns about, well, does the church follow culture, or is it informed with it, or in creative dialogue with it, or to stand apart from it? And that's the relation of the church to wider society is always complex. But I'm with you completely in terms of the mission and ministry of the church to those within the church, for those on the fringes and those outside. This debate has dragged on too long, and the fact that there hasn't been greater generosity and graciousness across the spectrum for LGBTQIA plus people is something that has really, really hurt us in many people's eyes. So I completely get that.
Yeah. And if we do get a resolution to this debate and discussion, Nick, and we start to focus on other priorities, where do you personally feel those priorities should be for the church?
Well, I think the church has got a range of different issues it's trying to juggle with at the moment. I mean, our first call is to follow Christ and to follow God, and to live out the 5 marks of mission in our society. So proclaiming the gospel, of being there for those who are on the margins, of proclaiming the integrity of creation, of fighting against injustice, of developing people and building them up in their faith. That's the core of what we're about. How that works out at that sort of local level, there are all sorts of issues going on. So there are all sorts of questions about viability of the church in some parts of our communities and how we can be better connected there. I'm based in Somerset at the moment, so I've gone and I've led services in gorgeous village churches where they only get 8 people coming along, and how you maintain that is a real issue. There are real questions for church in the UK at the moment. I don't know when people will be watching this, but we're talking the day after the general election's been announced. That's going to put a huge spotlight on what life's really like for a lot of people in Britain and the sort of country we should be. And as the national church, we need to be, sort of like holding society to the highest possible vision of what we could be in terms of inclusion, reaching out to the poor and the rest. And there are all sorts of issues the church has to engage with. I do sense around the LLF area, there is a general weariness and people wanting to move on. We do have a sense of wanting to move to next business. The problem is finding a settled space where we can park it for now when we do that. But I, for one, I think the church has an awful lot it can be doing in society. And as someone who came to faith, I came to faith when I was 18, and coming to faith has, given me so much sort of life and hope. It's been absolutely fantastic being able to really help people find that faith, and that life-giving hope is something that I hope we can be doing. So yeah, the church will never run out of things to do.
No, quite. Nick, it's been fabulous to get you on to the Godcast. I hope people who've listened or watched have been helped in understanding some of the challenges and some of the debates. And, and even in our context, Nick and I are both seeking the same thing, but maybe one of us is slightly more reserved and one of us wants to go at a faster pace. But that's the challenges for us all. Just to say, if anybody wants to support a more inclusive agenda, Nick, where would you signpost people who may be interested in what we've been talking about?
There are quite a few groups out there that people can be a part of. So whether you're wanting a bit more support, maybe if you're in a church where you're feeling that people aren't there on the same wavelength, or maybe a way you want to get involved either as an activist or support financially, there are many different ways of doing that. First of all, to mention, I'm involved with a new group that's setting up called Together for the Church of England, togethercov.org.uk, which is going to be doing a lot of campaigning about removing discrimination across the board, not just around sexuality, but other areas as well. So if you're interested in church governance and synods and how things work, do have a look at that. Do get in touch with them, get in touch with me. In terms of churches working out how they can be more inclusive or wanting to support a body helping churches do that, I would recommend Inclusive Church. They're a great organization. They've got about 1,000 churches, not just in the C of E, who are part of their network and who they support. So they're good to support. Otherwise, there are some specific groups people can look out for if they're just wanting to be in touch with people who are more sort of like within their church tradition. So within the Anglo-Catholic wing of the church, there's groups such as Affirming Catholicism. For evangelicals, there's a very lively group on Facebook called Inclusive Evangelicals, where a lot of people in churches which might have traditionally not taken an affirming view are finding themselves and finding good fellowship. So there's a lot of groups out there you can support or be a part of if you feel you want to be.
Fabulous. Good way to end the Godcast, Nick. Thanks so much. And we send our love to you from Burnley. Thanks for coming on.
Cheers. Thanks, Alex. Have a good day, mate.